Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes. And if you'd like, as we get started, feel free to comment on where you're joining in on the chat in your location. You can introduce yourself too if you'd like. I'll go first. All right, hello everyone who's joining. If you haven't yet, feel free to chime in the chat with where you're calling in from today. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. We've got coast to coast represented out here.
It's like it.
Oh, wow. Barbados. I see. That's pretty nice.
Well, I think that adds a whole new time zone to this list.
That's right, and inspiration for the attendees. All right, well, Nikki, is it okay if we get started here? Okay.
Great.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are really excited to get started and to have you at Be the Leader, Nobody Wants to Leave, a fireside chat with Kris Baird, who I'm very excited to introduce you all to in a minute here. I'm Rebecca Metter. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Wambi, and it is my absolute pleasure to be hosting this event for you all. Wambi's mission is to bring compassion to the forefront of human experience, and we do this in a number of ways, one of which is through our holistic recognition and engagement platform that addresses both the patient and the staff experience by harnessing the power of gratitude. Our gamified technology captures real-time voice of the patient, which really does drive meaningful recognition and motivates optimal care. We increase employees' feelings of belonging and being valued, which is so important right now. We've been shown to reduce clinician burnout and drive higher patient satisfaction and overall improve human experience in healthcare. So as part of our commitment to serving people first healthcare executives, we have doubled down during the pandemic on our efforts to really increase and deepen connections. And this is one of the ways that we do that. So we created a number of impactful events series that include fireside chats with experts in our industry. And today, Kris will be sharing some of her signature presentation of Be the Leader, Nobody Wants to Leave. Such an important topic right now. It couldn't couldn't be more timely and very valuable. And as she presents today, please feel free to submit your questions in the chat as they come to mind. We will try to get to them at the end. And so, chime in, share your thoughts, share your questions, and we'll have a conversation in the last 10 minutes of our presentation today. And so with that, I am going to welcome Kris. So Kris Baird comes to us with over 25 years as a nurse and a healthcare executive. She is the president and CEO of the Baird Group and understands the unique demands on doctors, nurses, and frontline staff. Since 1994, her consulting firm has worked with hundreds of hospitals, medical practices, and long-term care facilities on culture, leadership, patient experience, and employee engagement. In her flagship online training program, Be the Leader Nobody Wants to Leave, participants hone leadership skills that create a purpose-driven culture so that patients, employees, and providers become loyal, raving fans. Kris's proprietary model for culture change transforms the healthcare experience for patients, residents, and the people who serve them. And with that, it is my honor to welcome Kris to this fireside chat. Hi, Kris.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And I love the fact that you have your logo in the back. Moments move us. How perfect is that?
Thank you. We really believe in the moments that are upon us. And, I think so many times we take for granted sort of the mundane, but really the mundane can be so exceptional. And how do we kind of shed light on that? So at Wambi, we talk a lot about the moments that move us, regardless of how big or small they really are.
Yeah. And when I think about leadership, it is the moments that move us. It's those moments in time that make all the difference in how engaged an employee is, or, whether they're checking out.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I know a lot of your work is focused around sort of the relationship between leaders and team members and like honoring those moments. What are some things when you think about leaders and sort of relating to teams that you recommend as part of sort of your work? And how can people sort of become that leader that no one wants to leave through that relationship connection?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My first point is that teams are made up of individuals, and a great leader has to have an absolutely unrelenting focus on people as individuals. And honestly, that has never been more important than right now. And so, because no two people are identical, right? And for the first time in history, we've got 5 generations in the workforce. We have people from traditionalists all the way to Gen Zs, and they're not motivated the same way, and so for a leader to really make an impact, he or she has to have that unrelenting focus that people are individuals, and they have to be able to be keen observers. They have to have great communication skills. So there's a lot that leaders really need to have. And the truth is, especially in healthcare, that's where I've lived all of my life, is in healthcare. And, so often people are promoted from within, and they may be a really good nurse, they may be a really good tech, but they are not prepared for a new set of skills needed in leadership.
That is so true. And it's interesting as you think about sort of the top clinicians rising sort of to the top and becoming those frontline leaders and then getting promoted from that. How do people make that transition? Like, how do they make that transition from, being at the bedside and doing exceptional work, getting promoted, and now realizing, I have a bunch of people that I'm responsible for here. How do I kind of live up to this role that I've now been given? I know I'm an outstanding clinician. I can help them with the practice. I can help them at the bedside should they need that coaching. But what about all the other, stuff that sometimes we say soft skills or other sort of aspects of really being a leader?
Yeah. And for me, I literally went from staff nurse to leader and it was like as simple as a title change, a new name tag, and bam, I was responsible for, $1 million budget, all these people. And honestly, it was terrifying on the
Yeah.
inside. And, on the outside, I think every new leader wants to, kind of put on the facade that never let them see you sweat. And it was scary.
Yeah.
And the truth is that, when I was doing research on the subject of turnover, especially in nursing, I was looking at, what are some of the factors involved in turnover, and it always came down to two primary things: culture and leadership. Really were the biggest contributing factors, and the two are inextricably linked. The two are inextricably linked, and most of the CNOs that I interviewed for my research would say, I know I keep doing the same thing over and expecting different results, but I want to promote from within, and I have these great intentions about coaching them along, mentoring my new leaders, and life gets in the way. And so that is the reality that we live in, right? And you want to give people within your organization the opportunity. So you spot somebody that is a go-getter. They might be a really good clinician. They may get along really well with their teammates, and you think, yeah, they're interested in becoming a manager. I will give them this opportunity. But that doesn't mean they have the skill set. So it's important for organizations to make it safe for the new leader to ask questions, be a little vulnerable, and give them opportunities to grow in their positions, because there are so many moving parts to leadership. You have to be a really good observer. You have to be a good communicator. You absolutely have to have that ability to have difficult conversations with people. You've got to do the reviews. You've got to, and how can you do a decent review if you are not out there among your people? So rounding, being able to coach. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I encounter in coaching new leaders is they feel like they have to have the answers.
Mm.
When somebody comes to them and has an issue, they're thinking, well, I'm the manager now. I've got to have the right answer for them. When in fact, the art and science of being a good coach is knowing how to ask really good questions, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're hitting on something that's so important with this sort of authenticity that comes from vulnerability and then being able to grow. If we're not vulnerable, then how can we kind of stretch our skills and grow?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
One of the things that I've heard you say, which I think is relevant to what you're talking about right now, is that you need to train managers to become engagement experts. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that and just share?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So often when I'm working with organizations and I go in to do a culture assessment, let's say, and really peeling the onion, and doing a deep dive into the culture. And when I start asking questions about employee engagement, so often it's, oh, that's HR. Really? Okay. And why does it live in HR exclusively? Well, because they're the people. They do the hiring, they have these practices. And you look at it and you think, okay, they may be responsible for a certain facet of this. But honestly, as I said earlier, culture and leadership are inextricably linked. So shouldn't we help those leaders become the engagement experts? Know what good engagement looks like. Know what behaviors, know the levels of engagement so that you can look at your people and spot where they are. that you're a keen observer and you can get out there among your people and notice when there are subtle shifts in behaviors or attitudes that might be indicators that somebody's engagement is slipping a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So true. And, it's interesting because, earlier you were talking about how teams are groups of individuals and we need to get to know our team as individuals. What would you say to that leader that has, 60, 70 direct reports, or, in an organization where you might be actually in the C-suite across sort of a whole host of folks? How can people, we hear a lot, everyone is so busy. I mean, and the level of work has just increased over the last 18 months in so many different ways. And so what would you say to folks who are like, I have so many direct reports, I'm so busy sort of in my own right. How do I get to know my team members as individuals? How do I become an engagement expert when I don't have a lot of time?
Yeah, and the first step to that is get out of your office. Seriously. And I'm not going to be saying anything earth-shatteringly new about this next statement, but rounding. People have heard about rounding, for years and years, and yet it's amazing that when we teach our 8-part course, Be the Leader Nobody Wants to Leave, when we start getting into how to really be truly visible and present for your people, it's amazing how many people admit that they didn't really do rounding well, right?
Yeah.
And the other piece of it is people say rounding is a priority, but it doesn't get scheduled, right?
Yeah.
What gets scheduled gets done, period, right? And so most people that I coach will say, well, I fit it in where I can. Well, isn't that backwards? If something is truly a priority, if your people are truly a priority and you need to be out among them, talking, observing, getting to know them, that to get out there and, be in front of them, and know how to have the conversations, know how to observe and bring up the fact that, Rebecca, I've noticed you haven't been very talkative in our huddles lately. Tell me about that, and knowing how to talk, knowing how to use open-ended questions. It's a communication art. And you can't underestimate the value of it.
So true. And so, you're really hitting on a couple of things. One is not only do you need to show up, but you need to show up in a way that is going to allow for meaningful connection with your team members. And when you think about that, a lot goes into building that relationship and that connection. And I think about rounding, and we hear like, oh, rounding, it's looked at as a burden in a lot of ways. And it's like, well, if you're having those meaningful connections, can we kind of turn that on its head and really have the good conversations where the tidbits come out quickly and you can get to what you need to know. And then you can create a culture of belonging, of feeling valued, of openness, so that your team members are going to go over and beyond, and you're actually going to end up saving yourself time in the long run, certainly, as well as if we think about from a retention perspective.
Yes. And because hospitals are 24/7 operations, I get this question all the time. Well, what about nights? What about weekends? Well, what about them? I be there. And
Right.
I'm not saying you have to be on 24/7, but honestly,
Hey, Kris, can you hear me? Oh,
yes.
Okay, I don't know if other people experience this, but I think that you might have frozen for a minute. Does anyone, Diane, I see you. Was there a little freeze for a minute there? Yeah.
Okay.
Kris, would you mind repeating what you just said so that we can all get the benefit of that? Because I think that was important. And okay, perfect. Thank you, chat members. Appreciate that. So do you mind just repeating what you just said so that we could hear it?
Yeah, just being the night shift and weekends, leaders do need to be present.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not saying all the time, but I'm saying you do have to make it a point to connect with those people. I was working night shift in obstetrics, and I remember I could count on one hand how many times I ever saw the leader on night shift. And she would come in and she would go to her office to do paperwork. And I remember thinking, you're missing the opportunity to really, connect with us, to see what we do, to understand what a day in the life or a night in the life is like, on the unit. And so it was really disappointing. So anyway, those are some of the thoughts that I have about, fostering that visibility and presence. That rounding is not doing drive-bys. It's not saying, "Hey, how's it going?" Because every time somebody says, "How's it going?" or "How are you doing?" what are you going to respond?
Right, fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I teach, fine is a 4-letter word. Right?
Love that.
Fine is a 4-letter word.
Love that. If we learned anything during COVID, I think it was that when you ask someone how they are, that's not a 2-second answer. And we need to really pause and probe and be present and be real. Because I think as leaders, there's a lot of sort of there's a lot of sort of feeling that you have to have these boundaries around you to show like, okay, well, I need to be optimistic. Everything's going great. And I need to show everyone my strength. And all of those things are true, I think, to some extent, but being real creates an authentic where maybe you are scared about what's going on, or maybe you're unsure about certain things. You were saying you don't always have to have the answers, and how important it is to sometimes be like, I'm not sure. Let's try to tackle this together, or let me look into that. And I think that's where the strength and the trust can really be built, because it all comes back down to that trust. Like, you can't trust someone that's showing up and has a different energy or persona than, is consistent with reality.
Right. And, turnover is so costly to organizations, and people leave their bosses, not the organization. And we can't underestimate the importance of that relationship, that they need to feel valued. They need to be seen, right? And you're not going to do that from behind a closed door, behind your desk. You got to be out there.
That's so true. That's a great point. And I know that we said that we were going to save some questions for the end, but I am seeing some questions in the chat. I'm wondering if we can interlace them to some of our conversation here about, how can you engage your team as a leader, and what are some activities or some tactics that you might be able to use? The question specifically is around team building exercises, but I wonder if there are tactics. You just shared recognition and meaningful conversations, rounding. Would you like to share a little bit maybe about that, Kris?
Sure. And team building really starts with having a trusting environment, right? So transparent communication is really huge. But, I can't remember the direct quote from Mr. Rogers, but it was something along the line of, you need to hear the person's story. You can't dislike somebody when you know their story, or something along that line. So, but you get the gist of that. And so often people are thrown together and they don't really know each other's story. And so to have some exercises where they can really learn about each other can be so incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. We actually talked about a quote that you and I both love, by Sue Monk Kidd. Do you remember this one? Stories have to be told or they die. And when they die, they forget who we are and why we're here. Did I say that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we forget who we are and why we're here.
Forget.
And I love that because of healthcare. I mean, we've got such important stories.
Totally.
And you want to have a culture where you share the stories that bring out your mission, your vision, your values. And by telling those stories, we keep those things alive. And like she says in the quote, if we don't, the stories die and we forget who we are as healthcare, right? As a healthcare providers, and why we're here. And that is to care for others. And so it's vital, so storytelling is, when I think about creating a desired culture, 99.9% of the organizations we come in to help, to serve, they have not defined what they want that culture of the future to be. And the truth is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right? So one of the practices we implement with them is to define, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like, that desired culture? And how do you know you are there? And what are the steps we have to go through to get from where we are today to where we need to be in the future? And there's a huge leadership component to that. Once you do define that vision for the culture of the future, the next question is, who do we have to be as leaders to move the needle, to move down that pathway, to get from where we are to where we need to be? And so often, that is, people don't have a leadership development strategy in place. They don't have a retention strategy in place. Many have recruitment strategies, let's do that sign-on bonus or whatever, but they don't really have a rock solid retention strategy.
Yes, I definitely want to talk about the retention strategy, because I think what you hit on is critical, right? As leaders, I think there's so many things come up in a day and we get kind of tied down to what is at present, but what our role really is envisioning the future. And in order to have that, you have to have a strategy to get there. And so when you think about retention strategy, I'd love to hear a little bit about it. And actually, I think it's a good time to pose a poll question to all of our attendees today, and just ask, if we can post this question, how concerned are all of you about retention right now? And how many of you have defined your retention strategy? So if we could just take a minute, and if everyone would like to respond to this.
Yeah, this is important. We really want to know who we're talking to today. Maybe you're not concerned. Maybe you have plenty of staff, but I'm going to guess that you probably don't, because whenever I go into organizations, I don't ever hear people complaining that, wow, we're really overstaffed.
No, I've never heard that either. So I think that's a pretty good assumption here, but would love to, we'll share the results, I think, when we get them. I think they will pop up. But yeah, it's so important. What you were saying too, Kris, about sort of the retention strategy. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that? Oh, here we go. 74% of attendees are very concerned about retention. Mm-hmm. And of the attendees, a quarter have a defined retention strategy and 74% do not. So that's important to be really, to be aware that that many of us are very concerned about it, and many of us don't have the strategy. And sometimes it's just pausing to have a reflection like that, right? For us to get better, I feel like it's always good to have sort of that aha, eye-opening moment where you're like, oh, whoops, I was doing that. Or, okay, I gotta pause here and I need to look at the work I'm doing. I mean, when you think about defining your retention strategy, how do you recommend people sort of start that work? What can they look at as they're beginning to define that for themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say to think about retention first over recruitment. And the thing is, even how we talk about it, it always rolls off the tongue, recruitment and retention. Let's flip that around, retention and recruitment. So the top priority has to be on keeping the good people you already have. It's a lot more cost effective. And so some of the things that are important in a retention strategy. And I just want to also kind of sidebar a little bit. When I do ask people about retention strategy, I would say the majority say retention is a top concern, and yet fewer than 10% of organizations actually have a retention strategy. And of those who have a retention strategy, the bulk of them are focused on new hires, because we know the attrition rate is very high in the first year, and especially among new graduates. And so there's a heavy concentration there, and people are forgetting about everybody else. And this gets back to, you got to understand people as individuals, right? But you also have to start with hiring for fit. And when I talk about hiring for fit, there's a significant percent of managers who openly declare that they are not confident in their hiring abilities. And so often they haven't taken the time or have been taught how to define, what are the characteristics, what are the qualities that are most important to your team and in aligning with the organization. So you want to make sure that you've defined that, because 82%, according to a Gallup study, 82% of turnover, it goes right back to poor hiring, right? So hiring for fit, making sure that people are aligned with the values, not only of the organization, but of the department. So I'm all for getting people from the department involved and asking them, we're hiring. What are some of the characteristics we really want to get at? What does our ideal teammate look like? Of course, not physically, but what are the qualities we're looking for? What questions can we ask to get at those qualities and get the team involved so that they have a say? I mean, and I'm not just talking about the peer interviews. I'm talking about defining those qualities that they're really looking for. So that's a huge piece in a retention strategy, is starting with hiring for fit. The next is having a clear path for professional development. And this is a piece that is clearly lacking in many organizations. And if you're not paying attention to this, it's going to come back at you, especially with millennials and Gen Zs. They're quick studies. They want to know what's next. And so when you're having stay interviews, for example, to ask them, what skills are you learning here? And what additional skills would you like, to be learning? How can I support you? What are some of your aspirations down the road? Where do you see yourself in the future? And you cannot miss the opportunity to, if somebody says, I really want to go into leadership. Well, let's say they're 1 month out of school. You may be chuckling to yourself thinking they're not ready to be a leader. You've got to ask the questions. Oh, well, you're interested in leadership. Would you like to shadow? Or I'd love to have you serve on this team or head up this project. Giving them some opportunity. So having a clear path for development. A lot of times, managers will tell me, oh, we don't give tuition reimbursement, so I don't even want to talk about it. Development is a lot more than tuition reimbursement. And if you're not having those conversations, somebody else will be. And it probably won't be within your organization. So helping your leaders know how to have the conversations, the stay interviews, and know what the clear path for development is. Make sure that you're offering people meaningful work and that you're taking the time to help them connect to purpose. I mean, we work in healthcare. I'm very heart driven, so I've always felt really connected to purpose, but managers have a two-pronged responsibility around purpose. One, staying connected themselves. What is it that fills my cup about healthcare? But as a leader, Why do I want to be a leader? What challenges does this fulfill for me? So that's prong number one. But the second prong is, how do I help my team, each and every person stay connected to purpose?
So true. I mean, I think being purpose driven is something that a lot of us talk about, how we're all in this because we're purpose driven. But if we actually think about it, I mean, it is something that sets healthcare apart from many other industries. And so when you think about being purpose driven, and then for people to feel like, I have sicker patients than I have ever had before. I'm working in ways that I didn't expect I'd be working. I might be working on units I didn't expect I was working on. My purpose was to try to heal people, and maybe my patients aren't getting well at the rate that I am used to seeing or that I want. How can I feel now connected back to my purpose? Well, your purpose was to heal people and to be part of healing generally for this community. How can we as an organization ensure that you feel that way? And I think that is so unbelievably critical, and it really fits into, I think, everything you're talking about. I mean, what are some strategies that you've seen in terms of like people connecting back to their purpose? Like, Kris,
I bring leaders through an exercise where we take something as simple as a job description, basically job descriptions. There's nothing that warms the heart in any job description I've ever seen. There's nothing that says, oh, that list of tasks, I mean, that is connecting to something, no way, right? But so we take the job description in this exercise, and we help people to see that the tasks at hand really are connected. And let me give you an example. So the classic example I love to use is housekeeping. So instead of, if I'm going to judge whether or not somebody is connected to purpose, I would ask a housekeeper, let's say, what is it that you do here? And instead of them saying, I scrub floors, they would report that I'm the keeper of the first impression. When our floors shine, our patients are more confident that they are in a clean and safe environment. So now that is connection to purpose, right? So if you're only training people on tasks, you're missing the opportunity to help them feel like they're really contributing. And that is so important when I think about turnover. People want to feel valued. They want to know that they're contributing. And I recently did an executive roundtable with a group of home care executives. And I was mortified to see that 65% turnover is common among nursing assistants in home care. And when you look at the data, why the turnover? And a lot of it is that they don't feel connected. They don't feel a part of the team. Stop and think about that work. They're out in the field, they're by themselves, and leaders can help them feel more connected. And I think about the use of technology in helping the aides feel more connected. What you have at Wambi, being able to send a quick thank you and to report that the patients or the patient's family have sent a thank you. Those are things that are going to help the individual really stay connected to purpose and to see the value of their work and not feel so alone out there.
Totally. And it really goes back, I think, to what you were saying earlier, Kris, about the stories and capturing the stories so that people can really feel that, can connect those dots. It's not just the task, it's the impact of the task, and it's the ripple impact that happens as a result of that particular thing. So how do we kind of elevate more stories and get back to a heart place? Because that's where this work really blossoms.
Exactly. And having that culture that values story, that starts every huddle with a story, that starts every meeting with a story. And where do you get the stories? Well, hopefully you would have word of mouth, but if you have a mechanism in place where you are sharing, telling the story, saying, I spotted Rebecca doing X, she's going above and beyond on this standard or on this value. You're connecting the dots, and so often when we go into organizations, one of the things that we teach is the importance of recognition. You want a culture of recognition. And honestly, our old-fashioned approach is, maybe even using paper or an intranet form of recognition. But honestly, it's stories that move information from the head to the heart. And so when we're telling organizations, you want to have a culture of recognition, that means taking putting accountabilities in place, that the leaders need to be giving recognition, right? And you need to make it easy for peers to give recognition.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a story where I had met like a 24-year veteran nurse, incredible nurse working in northern New Jersey. And we had just deployed Wambi there. And I was there for a presentation, and she came over to me after. She was like, you know what, Rebecca, I just have to tell you, like, for 20 plus years, I've tried to treat my patients like they were family. That's always something that I've aspired towards. And it wasn't until now that I know that I do, because I heard from my patients, you treat me like family. Mm-hmm. And it's just stories like that are so meaningful and fill you up. And when you talk about like a culture of recognition, like you were just saying, or a culture of accountability, I've heard you talk about that as well. I think sometimes people feel like the word culture is a little like nebulous in some ways, but I like when you define it as it's just how we do things around here.
Yes.
And
that's exactly it. There are a lot of really in-depth definitions of culture, but let's get down to the pragmatic Kris Baird definition. It's how we really do things around here. So you might have some lofty statement on a plaque somewhere about this is who we are and what we stand for, but often the culture isn't really aligned with the lofty statement, and so we've got to get back to making sure that you're defining what you want that culture to be, and then you're making sure that at every single touch point, it's happening.
Love that. And, I think I'd love to trigger another poll question, because we were talking about culture of gratitude, and I think we can talk more about that. But one of the things that Kris, you and I talked about was this sort of how many, and this is a question that you had, which I think is really interesting. And if everyone on the call can respond to this, it'll be illuminating. So how many of you have received a note of appreciation from your leader at some point? And then the next question is, how many of you still have it?
And that is, if you got a note, those of you who did get a thank you note or recognition note, how many of you kept it? So while people are answering that, I have to say that one of the things I love about your software is that you can track which leaders are sending out, which departments are most active in recognition, whether it's peer-to-peer or leader. Okay, look at that. 90% said that they did get a note, and of those, 77% saved it. Now, I'm assuming only those who got notes answered the second question, but my informal research over the years, and I honestly have asked tens of thousands of leaders how many have gotten a thank you note, and keep your hands in the air if you have saved it. And it is remarkable. I would have said it was more like 95%, that save it. And it's a gift that keeps on giving. Somebody here said that they send notes to the staff's home on a regular basis when they're mentioned by patients or coworkers, and it's been very well received. That is phenomenal. Thank you for doing that. It is very memorable. One of the things that I've done in the past is not only thanked them, but at times, especially if they've been working extra, to send notes to the spouse and the children and saying, thank you for sharing your mom with us, and talking about what a difference he or she makes. So that all adds up, and it makes you feel valued. It makes you feel seen, right?
Absolutely. And, before we head into the questions here, one of the things that I think connect to this is when you think about building a culture of gratitude and accountability, and then also thinking about these meaningful connections and how do we really sort of have leaders as engagement experts. And this is obviously a critical component of it.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about how do you define celebration, acknowledgement, and recognition? And how do we do them meaningfully? Because they're all parts of a puzzle. So, just like a team member of mine always says, she's like, you can't eat one piece of broccoli a year and say that you're healthy. Just like you can't recognize a person once a year and tell them that, and let them feel their value. So with that, Kris, did you want to chime in on that before we get
into I would love to. And I think organizations get these mixed up. And I want to clarify the importance of all of the above, and yet they are very different. Celebration is kind of the, oh, wow, we just, went through our joint commission review with flying colors. Let's have an ice cream social. Okay, that's a celebration, right? Recognition is I'm seeing you and I'm thanking you for the contributions that you're making. So recognition is more personal. And so it is, and people get reward and recognition mixed up too. I honestly had somebody that I was coaching say, we have the 5-year, 10-year pins, and, no, that's just acknowledging that you've been here. And, that's not the same as true recognition, which is one-on-one. And we say recognition should have the 3 Ps. It should be prompt, personal, and plentiful. And so when I say prompt, try to do it in real time whenever you possibly can, or on the heels of an action. So I observed Rebecca doing something and I'm going to send her a note. I might thank her there, but I'm going to follow up too with a note saying, here's what I saw. This is why it makes a contribution to what we say we are in this organization. And I'm so proud you're on my team. Okay, that's recognition. Reward, I've had people say, I don't even bother because I can't give raises, or I don't have a budget, okay? I don't have a budget for recognition. I don't know about you, but sending a thank you is not that big of a deal. And you could write it on a piece of paper, but I want you to kind of eradicate excuses from your mind when it comes to recognition. Down and dirty exercise I do with people, I said, put 10 dimes in your left pocket in the morning. And every time you give somebody recognition throughout the day, I want you to move it from the left pocket to the right pocket. And at the end of the day, see how you did, right? Low tech, very low tech.
Love that.
Or have a jar on your desk. Every time you send a note, throw a marble or a dime or whatever in the jar and look how you did at the end of the week. Again, low tech, but accountability. And people will say to me often, wow, I thought I was doing a much better job.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually a great segue, Kris, and thank you so much for that, because I saw a couple of chat comments come in around sort of throwing money at people in order to get them to stay as part of a retention strategy. And when you think about sort of how management thinks about their staff and how staff feels, can you talk a little bit about some of that disconnect and how does sort of additional reward in the financial context of like, okay, well, we're going to pay X amount more. Really, how does that impact things? And does that take over for the engagement piece? Because from what we've seen is that if you're paying sort of the middle amount of where, you're supposed to be, not under, but like where you're supposed to be, it's actually really not about throwing more money at people. That's not what makes people stay. And there's been tons of data and research around that. That's like the fifth driver, but rather being more engagement focused is what helps people to feel their purpose and make sure they're living it out.
But never underestimate, you do need to be competitive.
That's correct.
Right? Yep. And so that is the responsibility of administration, to know what the market is and to be in there. When it comes to giving people money, it's not going to keep them engaged for very long. And when I think about the sign-on bonuses, I find that they're often counterproductive. They're putting a Band-Aid on one part of the bleeding, but it's creating resentment elsewhere. But it's important to get clear about really what motivates your people. Because when we do focus groups, one of the things I like to ask people, the frontline workers, what inspires you to do good work? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to respond with heart-driven statements. I want to give the type of care that I would want my parents to receive or my grandma to receive. I really care about our patients or our residents. And then we ask the leaders, what inspires you to do good work? And they'll tell us, I believe in what we do, et cetera, again, heart-driven. But then we'll ask the question, what do you think inspires your staff to do good work? And so often we hear money. And the reason I bring that up is that is a clear disconnect. That if a manager thinks their employees are driven only by money, they're not as likely to give the recognition. They're not as likely to be out there engaging and having conversations. So it's important to recognize that it's not about the money.
Absolutely. That's so important, Kris. And I know that we created a self-reflection together. Would it be a good time for us to have folks chime in on that?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think, thank you, Aziza. So for all of our attendees today, we're going to start to take some more questions in the last 8 minutes here. So feel free to post your questions in the chat. Also, Kris developed the self-reflection, which we've posted here in a link. Aziza posted it. Please go out to that site and just take a minute and do some self-reflection, because I think one of the things that Kris has made so clear today is that in order to get to where we need to go, we have to have a strategy. And the only way to identify whether we have a strategy or not is to do some self-reflection and be authentic about where we are and where we want to go. And with that, if you can just fill out that self-reflection, you can take a minute and do it now. And if there are additional questions for Kris or us today, you can feel free to post them in the chat and we will answer them. Also, we'll scroll through and see if there's any other questions that we haven't gotten to yet.
An action plan. I see that somebody's asking if there's an action plan strategy around retention that can be shared. And the first thing is to look at what you're currently doing, right? Look at what, establish your goals for retention, and then zeroing in on the strategies. So again, starting with hire for fit, that's number one on the retention strategies. But I don't have a tool or something that I just send out. What I will say is that because real retention happens, in the relationship between the manager and the staff, our course, Be the Leader Nobody Wants to Leave, 8 transformational skill builders for busy leaders, is where we really focus on the individual skill sets that are really needed for retention. And so, it's things like hiring for fit, it's mastering the stay interview, it is accountability, how to, manage expectations, understanding levels of engagement, coaching to levels of engagement.
Thank you, Kris. Looks like there's another question. How do you balance accountability with recognition in a small group?
Yeah, I'm not really clear what that question is asking. And I'm hoping you can clarify a little bit. Michelle, would you unmute and maybe you can ask directly?
Sorry, I was trying to figure out the button. This is Michelle. I'm calling from Charleston. Thank you again for doing this. I'll just say that out loud. I think many of us feel grateful to get some additional training, and I always find these little vignette learning opportunities wonderful. So in an environment when I have just a few staff, 5 faculty, I have a lot of students and things like that under me. What is a great way? Because I have one individual that is struggling in his role, and so there's a lot of accountability going on with that individual, and it is bringing the whole mood down and trying to still recognize him and be supportive and support to hopefully change that trajectory. So what are some recommendations for something like that? While my other team members are stepping up and doing what they need to be doing, I am recognizing them, but how do you make it look like it's, one that's really left out and not make it look like that rather?
Yeah, that's a tough one. What have you done so far?
So little wins, right? Like you said, the dime in the pocket kind of thing. I've been using that for this individual, like, hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate what you've done with this item. Or, how can I help you be successful? Tell me what would work for you. It's a struggle. It's a struggle in a small environment like that. And it's a close environment where we share cubicles and everybody's aware when there's a problem. And no matter how hard you try to keep it quiet, there's no way that's quiet. So, so some strategies for that would be helpful, but I'm very interested in what you think a good action plan would be from a perspective of other strategies to help identify, hiring for fit is something I'm really looking at to fill a couple of vacancies. And I bypassed some candidates because I didn't think they were a good fit and I'm not going there again, so I'm trying to be selective, but thank you.
Yeah. And, as you're looking at your retention strategy, make sure that you're also thinking about, or not thinking about, doing state interviews. That is your opportunity to re-recruit your brightest and your best. But getting back to your original question, I think you're doing great by going after the small wins. Yeah. And the other thing too is, as you see people within the department supporting that individual who's struggling, again, giving recognition there so that they're embracing him and, building up the whole team.
Yes. And one thing I totally agree with Kris on this. And also I would just add, one thing that you may want to look at is how does that individual interact with other teams, if there is interaction in other teams, and trying to get sort of a bigger picture sort of recognition strategy in play as well, where like maybe he's one of a bunch of people that worked on something, or maybe there was an interaction with a cross-functional team member that did go well, and bringing that into the cohort or to the smaller group so that some of his her positive behaviors can be seen and recognized together. Because really, I think when things become too honed in such a small group, it does create an energy, and it's important to kind of break that up so that people can see, how do I fit into a bigger picture? And then again, exactly how you're doing it with observation and trying to focus on like those little wins that are coming up, figuring out how those fit into a bigger picture sort of strategy and look so that it kind of comes out of that very intimate setting.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. Well, I think we're at time. I know Kris and I would love to take more questions because it's so much fun, but I'm going to pause here because we are so grateful for all of your time. And I just have to thank Kris Baird, who is always just such a pleasure to connect with. And you see Kris's email address on here, and highly recommend reaching out to Kris. And if any of the questions that came up today, if you have additional questions, we'll be following up as well with some resources. And again, thank you from Wambi for joining us for another fireside chat. This was a lot of fun, very meaningful. And again, we hope that you're able to take some pieces from this and bring it back to your own work. And in the spirit of gratitude, again, thank you all for your benefit of time and presence and spirit today. And we wish everyone a good day and many good leadership conversations to come. So thank you all.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye, take care.